Your Honor. With all due respect, this court does not have the authority to cage a man like me. The courtroom went completely silent. Epstein Cole didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Confidence sat on his shoulders, like a tailored suit. Perfect posture. Immaculate tie. A faint smile that suggested he had already calculated the ending of this story. And it did not include handcuffs. The judge looked down at him from the bench, expression unreadable. You believe this court lacks authority? The judge asked. Calmly. Epstein adjusted his cufflinks. I believe, he said smoothly, that certain realities must be acknowledged. A quiet murmur rippled through the gallery. The spectators weren't random citizens. They were executives, donors, influential figures in dark suits who had not once looked nervous since the hearing began. The prosecutor stood. Your Honor. The defendant's statement is consistent with the pattern we've presented, a belief that he operates above consequence. Epstein turned slightly, not even looking at the prosecutor. Belief. He repeated. No. Experience. The judge leaned back slightly. Double quotes, Mr. Cole. The judge said evenly, this is a criminal proceeding, not a boardroom. Epstein's smile widened just a fraction. And yet, he replied, the room seems familiar. The tension tightened. The charges against Epstein Cole had been read hours earlier. Financial exploitation schemes, coercion, influence manipulation, coordinated cover-ups. None described in graphic terms. But the implications were heavy enough to darken the air itself. The prosecutor stepped forward again. For over a decade, Your Honor, the defendant cultivated networks designed to silence opposition, reward compliance, and intimidate scrutiny. Epstein gave a small, almost bored sigh. Allegedly, he corrected. The judge tapped a pen once against the bench. We will maintain procedural discipline, the judge said. Mr. Cole will refrain from commentary unless addressed. Epstein inclined his head slightly. Of course. But the confidence never left his face. The prosecutor continued. We will show that the defendant used influence from powerful associates to avoid investigation repeatedly. At that, several figures in the gallery shifted slightly. The judge noticed. Let the record reflect visible reactions in the gallery. The judge said calmly. Epstein's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, that's unnecessary. Sit down, the judge replied, without raising his voice. The attorney sat. Epstein leaned toward the microphone. You're attempting to dramatize success, he said. That's not a crime. The prosecutor didn't hesitate. Intimidation is. The word hung in the air. Epstein's eyes narrowed, just slightly. Careful. He said quietly. The judge looked directly at him. Mr. Cole, the judge said, tone sharpening. Are you threatening counsel in open court? Epstein blinked once. No, Your Honor, he said smoothly. Merely advising. A low murmur again. The judge folded his hands. You are not in a position to advise anyone here. The judge said. Epstein finally looked up at the bench fully, and for the first time, the smile thinned. Then perhaps, Epstein replied, we should move to the part where this ends. The prosecutor stepped forward with a stack of documents. It will end, she said, when accountability begins. Now, before this gets any deeper, if you're watching and you believe power should never override justice, make sure you subscribe and support the channel. Stories like this reveal what happens when influence meets the law. And today's case is only getting started. The judge cleared his throat. Proceed, he said. The prosecutor lifted the first exhibit. Exhibit A, she announced. Documented. Transfers tied to shell entities connected to the defendant. Epstein didn't look concerned. Legal, he said flatly. The prosecutor turned a page. Exhibit B, Internal Communications. Referencing pressure application toward regulatory officials. Epstein exhaled through his nose. Corporate language. He replied. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Cole, he said, you will speak when addressed. Epstein gave a small nod. The prosecutor continued. Exhibit C, sworn testimony from former associates stating that refusal to cooperate resulted in career destruction. The gallery grew still. One man in the second row, silver-haired, impeccably dressed, stared straight ahead. Jaw tight. Epstein noticed. He didn't look worried, he looked annoyed. The judge turned to the defense. Your response? Epstein's attorney stood again. These are interpretations, he said quickly. Business disputes reframed as criminal conduct. The prosecutor interjected. Business disputes do not include coordinated silence. Agreements enforced through intimidation. Epstein leaned back in his chair. You make ambition sound sinister, he said calmly. The judge's voice cut through the room. Ambition does not require coercion. Silence again. The prosecutor approached the bench. Your Honor, we request. The court acknowledged the defendant's pattern of leveraging powerful individuals to obstruct accountability. Epstein's eyes hardened now. That is speculation. The judge looked directly at him. Mr. Cole, he said. Multiple investigations into your conduct were closed without resolution. Epstein shrugged lightly. That speaks to innocence. The prosecutor shook her head. It speaks to interference. A shift in the gallery again. The judge noticed the pattern each time interference was mentioned. Certain faces stiffened. Mr. Cole, the judge said slowly, do you deny using relationships to discourage inquiry? Epstein smiled again. I maintain relationships, he said. That is not illegal. Unless, the judge replied, those relationships are weaponized. That word landed differently. weaponized. For the first time. Epstein's fingers stopped moving. The prosecutor stepped closer. We will show, she said clearly, that the defendant believed his wealth and associations made him structurally immune. Epstein's eyes flashed briefly. Belief has nothing to do with it, he said. The judge tilted his head slightly. Then what does? Epstein held the judge's gaze. Reality, he replied. A pause, long measured. The judge leaned forward. Epstein's forward. Slowly. Let me clarify something for you, Mr. Cole. He said quietly. The courtroom leaned in without moving. In this courtroom, the judge continued, there is only one reality. Epstein didn't blink. And what is that? He asked. The judge's voice dropped lower. No one, he said, is immune. For the first time since entering the courtroom, something subtle shifted in Epstein Cole's expression. Not fear, not yet, but calculation. And behind him, in the rows of powerful men who had arrived so confidently that morning, a different emotion began to surface, uncertainty. This was only the beginning. Asterisk. Epstein held the judge's gaze a second longer than necessary. It wasn't defiance, it was measurement. He was calculating tone, posture, leverage, the same way he had done in private rooms for years. Except this time, there were no quiet negotiations, no controlled lighting, no prearranged outcomes, just a courtroom, and a judge who wasn't blinking. The prosecutor stepped forward again. Your Honor, the state would like to call attention to Exhibit D. She placed a thin folder on the evidence table. Encrypted. Communications recovered from a private server owned by the defendant. Epstein's attorney rose immediately. Objection. Foundation. Foundation has been established, the prosecutor replied calmly. Digital forensics testimony was entered earlier this morning. Asterisk. The judge nodded once. Overruled. The folder opened. The prosecutor adjusted her glasses and began reading. Make sure the invitations are selective. Loyalty first. A faint shift in the gallery, she continued. Anyone who talks loses access permanently. Epstein's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. The prosecutor looked up. Would you like to explain what loses access means, Mr. Cole? Epstein folded his hands on the table. It means business privileges, he said evenly. Private events. Investment opportunities. The prosecutor tilted her head. And careers. Silence. Asterisk. Epstein didn't answer. The judge stepped in. You will respond. Epstein exhaled slowly. People exaggerate consequences when they feel explained. The prosecutor didn't smile. So the former associate who testified that his contracts were terminated within 48 hours of declining your invitation exaggerating. Epstein's eyes flicked briefly toward the gallery. So toward a man who suddenly looked very interested in the floor. Coincidence, Epstein replied. The judge leaned forward slightly. That word appears frequently in your defense. The prosecutor moved to another page. Your Honor, we also have financial routing that connects 3 nonprofit entities to accounts under the defendant's discretionary control. Asterisk. Epstein's attorney stood again. Those entities are compliant and audited. The prosecutor didn't look at him. Compliant organizations do not transfer funds through 5-layered accounts to avoid regulatory thresholds. A faint ripple of discomfort moved across the back row. The judge noticed it again. Let the record reflect visible agitation among gallery attendees, he said. Epstein's composure flickered just slightly. Your Honor, he said, voice sharpening for the first time, this is turning into theater. The judge looked directly at him. No, he said calmly. This is turning into clarity. The prosecutor stepped closer to the bench. We intend to demonstrate a coordinated structure of influence, she said. The defendant did not operate alone. A sharper silence now. Epstein's attorney stiffened. Speculation, he said quickly. Not speculation, the prosecutor replied. Documentation. She held up another exhibit. Correspondence between the defendant and various high-profile individuals. Regarding protective positioning. Epstein's eyes hardened. That phrase is taken out of context. The judge raised an eyebrow. Provide context. Epstein hesitated. For reputational management, he said finally. The prosecutor's tone shifted, quieter now. Is reputational management why investigative inquiries into your operations were halted 3 separate times? Epstein leaned back. Coincidence, he repeated. Asterisk. The judge tapped the bench once with his pen. Coincidence, he said slowly, does not usually leave a paper trail. A murmur broke out before the bailiff silenced it with a firm glance. Epstein's attorney leaned toward him and whispered urgently. Epstein waved him off. I will address this, he said calmly. The judge nodded once. Proceed. Epstein stood. He adjusted his jacket. He looked at the judge, not the prosecutor. You're attempting to construct a narrative, he said. One where ambition becomes corruption and success becomes threat. The judge said nothing. Epstein continued. I built networks. I created access. I rewarded loyalty. That is how power functions in any high-level environment. Asterisk. The prosecutor crossed her arms. And what happens to those who refuse loyalty? Epstein didn't answer immediately. He scanned the room. The men in the gallery, once relaxed, now sat rigid. The judge spoke quietly. That is the central question. Epstein's composure tightened again. Nothing illegal, he said. The prosecutor stepped forward one last time. Then, why? She asked. Did 5 former associates sign sworn statements describing systematic pressure to remain silent? Epstein's jaw flexed. Disgruntled individuals often collaborate, he said. The judge leaned forward fully now. And why? He continued, voice lower, did one of them request witness protection? Asterisk. That landed differently. Epstein blinked once. The prosecutor let the silence stretch. For fear, she said softly. Epstein's eyes narrowed. Fear, he repeated. Of what? The prosecutor met his gaze. Of you. The word didn't echo. It didn't need to. The room felt colder. Epstein let out a short laugh. But it lacked its earlier smoothness. You're elevating ordinary business disputes into mythology, he said. The judge's voice cut in. This court deals in evidence, not mythology. Asterisk. He looked down at the file before him. For years, the judge said slowly, investigations into your activities dissolved. Witnesses withdrew. Agencies paused. He looked up again, and every time, you walked away. Epstein didn't deny it. He simply stood there. Yes, he said. The prosecutor tilted her head. Why? Epstein's lips curved faintly. Because nothing stuck. The judge's expression changed, not anger. Recognition. You believed, the judge said, that it never would. Epstein didn't answer. Asterisk. But he didn't have to. The judge sat back. Mr. Cole, he said calmly, do you understand the gravity of what is unfolding here? Epstein held his gaze again. I understand risk, he replied. The judge's tone hardened just slightly. No, he said. You understood insulation. A faint shift again behind Epstein. One of the powerful attendees adjusted his collar. Another whispered urgently to a third. For the first time. Epstein glanced back at them, and this time, their faces didn't look confident. They looked uncertain. The prosecutor stepped forward once more. Your Honor. The state is prepared to move toward sentencing arguments. A ripple of shock moved across the room. Epstein's attorney stood immediately. Asterisk. Your Honor, we object to acceleration. There are motions pending. The judge looked at the docket. Motions that have been addressed, he said. Epstein remained standing. Sentencing. Kay said quietly. The judge's voice was steady. Yes. The confidence didn't disappear from Epstein's face, but something behind his eyes shifted, because for the first time, this no longer felt like a performance, it felt like consequence. And behind him, in the rows of men who once believed proximity to him meant protection, silence began turning into distance. The judge folded his hands. Mr. Cole, he said, before this court moves forward, you will have an opportunity to speak. Epstein inhaled slowly. This was the moment he had always controlled. The moment where influence entered quietly and changed outcomes, except there was no one whispering to the judge. No private recess, no side door, just the bench, the law and ends. A room full of people realizing something they had never considered before. Maybe. This time, it wasn't dissolving. Epstein remained standing. The courtroom waited for years. Rooms had waited for him like this. Investors, executives, officials all leaning in for whatever carefully engineered statement he would deliver. He adjusted his cuffs once more. Your Honor. He began, voice steady, composed. What has been presented today is an interpretation of success through the lens of resentment. The prosecutor didn't move. The judge watched him without interruption. I operate, Epstein continued, in environments where loyalty is currency, where discretion is expected, where influence is not a crime. It is infrastructure. A faint murmur stirred in the gallery, quickly silenced. He paced one step. Measured. You speak of intimidation, he said, turning slightly toward the prosecutor. But in competitive arenas, consequences follow decisions. That is reality. Not coercion. The prosecutor replied calmly, consequences engineered through fear are coercion. Epstein ignored her and faced the judge again. Every investigation cited here concluded without formal conviction until now. He said, every inquiry failed to substantiate these dramatic claims. The judge's expression remained unchanged. And why do you believe that was? The judge asked. Epstein didn't hesitate. Because allegations collapse under scrutiny. The prosecutor stepped forward. Or because scrutiny collapsed under pressure. A sharper tension filled the room. Epstein exhaled lightly. Speculation. He said again. The judge leaned forward. Mr. Cole, he said evenly. Multiple agencies testified that cooperation stalled after external influence was applied. Epstein's jaw tightened. Influence is not illegal. He replied. Obstruction is the judge. Silence. The judge continued. You have built a defense around sophistication, he said. Around technical compliance. Around the appearance of legality. Epstein held his posture. Yes. The judge nodded slowly. But this court examines substance, not polish. Epstein's eyes flicked briefly. Poured the gallery again. One of the men who had arrived with visible confidence now avoided eye contact entirely. The prosecutor spoke. Again, the defendant's own communications reference shielding. Layers, she said. If pressure rises, we redirect. Epstein's voice hardened slightly. Strategic planning, he replied. The judge's tone cooled further. For what, Mr. Cole? A pause. Epstein's answer came slower now. For survival. The word hung strangely in the air. The prosecutor seized it. Survival from what? Epstein didn't respond. The judge's gaze intensified. Survival from accountability. Epstein's composure wavered, not visibly to most. But enough. He straightened again. I have created opportunity for countless people in this room, he said. I have funded initiatives, supported institutions, opened doors. The prosecutor's voice was steady, and closed them just as easily. A quiet rustle. The judge folded his hands again. Mr. Cole? He said, voice measured and precise. This court is not evaluating your philanthropy. He paused. It is evaluating your conduct. Epstein's breathing slowed. Deeper now. You are making me an example, he said quietly. The judge responded without hesitation. No, he said. Your actions made you one. A long silence. The judge turned slightly toward the clerk. Then back to Epstein. This court has reviewed financial evidence, sworn testimony, digital correspondence, and documented patterns of intimidation. Epstein's attorney rose again, desperation creeping into his tone. Your Honor, the defendant has no prior convictions. He has complied with every procedural requirement since indictment. The judge nodded. Compliance during prosecution does not erase obstruction before it. The attorney sat. Epstein finally stopped pacing. He stood still now. This is about power, he said quietly. The judge didn't disagree. Yes, he said. It is. A flicker of satisfaction passed through Epstein's eyes, as if he believed the admission helped him. But the judge continued. And about its misuse. The satisfaction vanished. The courtroom air felt heavier than at any point in the proceedings. The judge looked down briefly at the sentencing memorandum. Then, back up. 4 years, he said, voice calm but firm. You operated within carefully constructed layers. You insulated yourself through wealth, relationships, and complexity. Epstein said nothing. You believed, the judge continued, that insulation equaled immunity. Epstein's lips parted slightly, then closed again. The judge's tone lowered. This court rejects that premise. A stillness fell that felt almost physical. Mr. Epstein Cole. The judge said formally, you stand convicted of coordinated financial exploitation, obstruction of regulatory processes, and systemic coercion. Several of the powerful men in the gallery stiffened visibly. Epstein remained upright. But his fingers tightened against the table edge. The judge continued. Given the scale, duration, and deliberate concealment involved, this court finds that a conventional sentence would fail to reflect the severity of the conduct. A faint whisper broke out, quickly silenced. Epstein's attorney stood halfway. Your Honor, sit. The judge said sharply. The attorney froze, then obeyed. The judge's eyes locked onto Epstein's. You leveraged proximity to influence, he said. You cultivated silence. You treated consequence as negotiable. Epstein's breathing changed, slower, controlled. The judge's voice remained steady. Therefore, this court imposes a sentence designed not only to punish, but to dismantle the structure you built. A ripple of shock spread across the gallery. Epstein blinked. Once, the judge continued. You are hereby sentenced to a term of confinement at the highest security classification permitted under statute. A visible reaction now, several of the influential spectators shifting sharply. Epstein's attorney shot to his feet. Your Honor, that level is reserved for 4 cases involving systemic corruption and obstruction. The judge replied coldly. Epstein's composure cracked. Not dramatically, but undeniably. His jaw tightened harder. The judge wasn't finished. In addition, he said, this court orders a comprehensive forensic audit of all affiliated entities, trusts, and advisory boards associated with the defendant. A stunned silence behind Epstein. One man whispered urgently to another. The judge heard it. Let me be clear, he continued. If any individual in this courtroom participated in concealment, coercion, or interference, this ruling extends to you. Now the shock was visible. Epstein slowly turned his head. The powerful men who once radiated certainty now looked pale. One of them actually stepped back. Epstein faced forward again. You're destabilizing institutions, he said quietly. The judge's voice was ice. No, he said. I'm stabilizing accountability. The gavel lifted slightly, but did not strike yet. Epstein's voice lowered. You think this ends with me? The judge held his gaze. It begins with you. That landed harder than the sentence itself. The courtroom felt different now. Not fearful. Exposed. The judge raised the gavel fully. This court does not bend to wealth, he said. It does not defer to proximity. And it does not negotiate with intimidation. Epstein's confident posture was gone now. He stood still, but no longer dominant. Mr. Cole. The judge concluded, for years, you believed consequence was theoretical. The gavel came down. It is now practical. The crack echoed through the courtroom. Gasps followed. Behind him, the powerful figures who once believed they were insulated by association sat frozen, stunned, not just by the sentence, but by the investigation now pointed toward them. Epstein didn't move as officers stepped closer. For the first time since the proceedings began, he did not speak, and for the first time in years, no one moved to protect him.